Khan returns, but this time not on screen. Episode 1 of Star Trek's new audio drama revisits Space Seed and the path to Wrath of Khan, with Sulu, Tuvok, and echoes of Star Trek history. Is it a worthy start or a missed opportunity? Let's break it down. Well, hey everyone, I'm Nick and welcome back to Sci-Finatics. Well, today we're talking about the first episode of Star Trek Khan, the audio drama that's recently come out featuring Sulu and Tuvok, and a bit of a return to the events following the Space Seed episode of original series that interconnect with what happens in Star Trek II Wrath of Khan. It's an interesting story and a different dynamic for Star Trek in terms of being audio only. I thought the story was a good one and great to hear George Takei and Tim Russ reprising their respective roles, as well as other sci-fi series actors such as Ren Schmidt, who plays Margot Madison on For All Mankind. The first episode begins at a Starfleet hearing. A Starfleet officer, Rosalind Lear, wants to go back to Ceti Alpha V and retrieve the logs from Marla MacGyvers, who was that Starfleet officer at the end of Space Seed who basically tried to help Khan take over the Enterprise, and she ended up at the end of the episode given the choice of whether she wanted to be court-martialed and thrown in prison, or to go with Khan and the rest of his troop to live on Ceti Alpha V. The story takes place 3 months after Star Trek Generations, where Kirk was killed fighting Toli and Soren there with Picard on the mountaintop, and Lear wants to uncover some of MacGyver's logs, and it's the job of Captain Sulu and the Excelsior to take her back to retrieve them. We hear a story about a lab filled with children that was saved in Montana from eugenics labs. It kind of seemed like it was a similar facility to the one we saw in Star Trek Strange New Worlds, the Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow episode, where Kirk and La'an travelled back to the 21st century Toronto and ended up finding a young Khan in a facility there. So it seemed like a similar place. These children were liberated from the facility and saved as part of the Space Seed, a group of people that Kirk and the Enterprise ran into in Space Seed. So Sulu ends up taking Lear to Ceti Alpha V to find out exactly what happened. At this particular point in the timeline, Tuvok is serving as an ensign on board the Excelsior, much as we saw in that flashback episode of Star Trek Voyager. And he beams down to Ceti Alpha V with Lear amidst a dust storm to try to recover these logs from Marla MacGyvers. I found myself, when I was listening to this audio drama, struggling to get a full picture of exactly what was going on. It basically felt like I was watching an episode of Star Trek with the TV screen turned off. I'm just listening to the sound. Which, when you think about it, you need a little bit more information when it's an audio drama to set the scene. Characters, I found, would suddenly start talking, and I was wondering, who am I listening to here? Is this, which officer is it? Because it wasn't immediately apparent, not only with some of the stuff that was going on with Sulu and Tuvok and the crew of the Excelsior, but also listening to the logs and everything from the settlers at Ceti Alpha V as part of Khan's group. People would just start talking and you would go, what's going on here? I felt like there needed a little bit more scene setting, like almost like you needed Lear to narrate what exactly she's listening to in terms of the logs, to paint a more coloured picture of exactly what's going on. Inside the settlement, Lear and Tuvok discuss the history of Khan, and in a hidden alcove they find some data recording tapes, and far more than what they expected to find. It would appear that these recordings were made beyond just a few logs from MacGyvers, and they return back to the Excelsior. In some of the early logs, I thought it was quite interesting that Khan was actually quite excited about settling this planet. He called it a paradise. It was a lush planet with lots of vegetation. They were working hard to bring down some trees and so forth, and starting to create shelters and buildings and everything on the planet. The manual labour and everything that was going on in terms of starting to build the colony. Kirk and the Enterprise had provided a lot of provisions for them, enough to last a whole year, including a whole medlab facility, which seemed like quite an impressive amount of staff that they were given. So it seemed like that Khan was actually quite pleased with the amount of resources that they'd been given to start themselves a colony. A lot of the crew and everything were fixated on acquiring a starship, but it's like, well, what do you want a starship for? Surely you just want a starship so you can go find yourself a planet to settle and live on, which they've, in this particular situation, given themselves a pretty good planet to settle on. They've got farming tools and they've got seeds and everything, and spirits are pretty high. The planet seems pretty lush with life, and there's talk amongst the augment females to talk of breeding embryos. Whereas the augmented females seem like they're bowing down to Khan and everything, MacGyver's isn't happy says she's not comfortable with everybody worshipping him quite so much, and she refuses to grovel down to him. But overall, Khan is pretty happy and his spirits are high because he's glad he's got a home for his people. Building of the colony continues, and we talk to Joaquin, who was this guy in the original series episode Space Seed, but more prominently played by Judson Scott in Star Trek II Wrath of Khan, who looked like this. So I'm glad they're connecting some of the characters that we saw in Space Seed and Wrath of Khan to be part of the prominent cast in this. It would seem that Joaquin has a son who gets in a fight with another boy called Paolo, fighting over the fact that he's a half-breed, and Khan settles the fight, basically saying everybody's equal and we're all got a fresh start and everybody needs to just get along. They go off fishing and everything for some supplies and everything, but one member of the group, Hugo, is a bit disgruntled by Khan's leadership. Khan sees the extraordinary potential of the planet, and he can see what they can build and see how they can establish this place as a massive colony. But Hugo's a bit short-sighted. All he could see was the necessity to steal a starship. It's like, well, dude, what are we going to do with the starship once you had it? Go and find a planet to settle on. The group are all pretty behind Khan and his exploits, but Hugo walks with Khan, and basically Khan says, you'll either get with the program here or you're going to be exiled, mate. So you better just get with the program because this is where we're living now. And he agrees to support Khan, even though Ivan doesn't like the insubordination that he showed towards him. Meanwhile, Milo MacGyver's is in medbay and is inventorying the medical supplies, where there's a discussion about fertility drugs. Apparently the augment females were genetically engineered not to be able to produce children. So the males were made fertile, but the females weren't, so that they could control their production and so forth. And MacGyver's comes to the realization that the only reason that Khan permitted her to go with them to the colony is because she's a woman that can bear children. Therefore, she was just brought along for her ability to procreate, which she's not particularly happy about, just being brought along as a breeding woman. Joachim comes back with the food, and we get the first hint of something being not quite right on this planet in the form of a meteor shower, which initially they pass off as a bit of a fireworks display, and it's all high spirits and everything because they're building their colony and everything. We know this is a bit of foreshadowing towards what's to come with Ceti Alpha V exploding in 6 months from now. MacGyver's tries to contact the Enterprise to see if they're still in range. She's maybe changed her mind about the whole settling here with Khan and his people, realising maybe the court-martial is looking pretty good at this point rather than being just a breeding sack for Khan. Khan catches her, but also feels a bit betrayed by her change of heart. MacGyver's is pretty appalled at the reasonings behind she was brought there, but Khan basically says, well, you're stuck here now. He smashes the communicator so she can no longer have any communication with Starfleet or the Enterprise, and tells her the story of the Spanish settlers of South America and how they burnt their ships upon arriving, so they were forced to settle. But MacGyver's corrects him to say, well, the captain left one ship intact just in case he had to flee, which is basically what she was doing. Hugo and Ivan are taking a walk along the cliffs to explore, and Ivan, who wasn't particularly happy with Hugo's insubordination and calling out Khan and being a little bit traitorous earlier, essentially throws him off the cliff because of his disloyalty. I found this scene again, like going back to what I was talking about earlier, a little bit hard to grasp, because you hear them talking, but you need a bit more information to set the scene, that they're walking along a cliff edge. There was a very subtle mention of it, but I didn't think it painted the picture adequately in terms of the fact that they're walking along a precipice and he was about to throw the other guy off the cliff. I definitely think it needed a little bit more narration or something, just knowing what we're exactly looking at here, because we can't see anything, we're just hearing. And if we jump into a scene with two characters talking, it's like, well, who am I listening to? Because I can't see them, as you would do if you're watching an episode. So you need to establish, who am I listening to? Where are they and what are they doing? And sometimes when you just jump into a scene and they just start talking, your brain is searching for that visual. It's like, what am I supposed to be imagining here? So I found the episode was a little bit lacking in that department. At the end of the episode, we go back to Tuvok and Leia. The Excelsior is still in orbit of Ceti Alpha V, and Sulu wants to know when they can depart. Leia has 5 days to finish gathering whatever information and research that she needs. I thought this was an interesting first episode. I would have liked to see it as an animated series or something. I think you could have taken the audio drama, and even if it's just done with basic 2D animatics or something, just to give some visual representation of the episode, I think would have been good. It doesn't have to be really in-depth animation, something like Star Trek Prodigy, but you could have maybe done something like the Babylon 5 Road Home animated movie. Just that level of animation, I think, would have made this really interesting. And it wouldn't necessarily be as expensive to do something like that as it would be to do something full-on animated like Prodigy was. That would have been my preference, I think. I think it needed that visual connection. The audio only was you can tell it's an interesting story, but I think it just needed something a bit more. But we'll see how the series progresses. What did you guys think? Leave your thoughts in the comments section and we'll get chatting about that. Be sure to check out my merch in the merch shop. Plenty of cool t-shirts and mugs and hoodies and caps and everything. Check those out for a real bargain and support the channel at the same time. We'll be back soon with another video. Catch you guys soon.